Is your small business growing? That's the question we address right here on the Grow Your Biz Show. It's where we interview strategic entrepreneurs who inform and inspire you on your solopreneur or small company journey. Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Grow Your Biz Show. Hello and welcome to episode number 108 of the Grow Your Biz Show. I'm the host of the program, Paul Madsen, and also the founder of growmedia.com. Richard and Marjorie, growmedia.com helps small businesses to tell their unique business story via the social media videos that we do together. That's what growmedia.com is. Marjorie Sturgeon and Richard Lewis, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, appreciate it.
Good to have you here. Thanks for coming over.
Glad to
They
be
are, of course, the founders and owners, co-owners of Weberized. Did I say that right?
Yes.
Okay,
Good
awesome.
job.
And we're going to learn a lot more about what they do. First, forgot to mention that we also have not only social media videos, but we also obviously have the TV show right here at KPAO Studios in Omaha, Nebraska, and with many thanks to them as well. Marjorie, Richard, Weberized. Tell me, what business are you in, Marjorie? What customer benefit do you provide for your customers?
We are your one-stop shop for creating a podcast and incorporating it as part of your digital marketing strategy and presence.
Wonderful. And so you're telling me that a podcast is part of a digital strategy? What is a digital strategy?
Yes.
Now, I started a business 20 years ago. I didn't have a digital strategy. What does that mean?
Right, so today you really want to use as many platforms as you can to kind of meet your business goals. And so there's social media, there's your own website, and podcasting is just another addition to creating an integrated digital strategy to meet those goals.
Just in case someone has been sleeping under a rock, Richard, for 10 years, 15 years, what is a podcast?
A podcast is it's a form of communication to get your story, your ideas, your passions out to the masses.
And via what media? Do I stand out on a cliff somewhere and shout? What do I do?
No, but what we can do is we can record.
Okay.
And we can put that on the internet and get it out to everybody.
And we're going to talk a lot about that, the nuts and bolts behind that, the why, the how, and all that kind of thing. And more about digital strategy as well. Before we do that, tell me, Richard, why are you in this business? I mean, why podcasting? Why this crazy business?
Well, podcasting has become very huge over the last decade. The number of podcasting has grown exponentially. And there are a lot of people out there who have stories to tell. They have ideas, they have passions that they just want to get off their chest, really.
Right.
And so what we want to do is we want to provide a platform to do just that, for you to share your passions, to share your ideas, to share your stories with the masses.
Well, and that's awesome that you want to facilitate that. It sounds like you have a real interest in getting those voices out there, it sounds like. Well, that leads to the next question then, I guess, which is, there are a lot of avenues for people to actually get out there and tell their story nowadays. I mean, it can start with my little old phone here and so on. And everybody has one now, including most 7-year-olds. So I don't know if they have podcasts, but it'd probably be done.
They probably do.
Yeah.
Probably wouldn't be surprised. Well, what I'm going for, Marjorie, is what makes Weberized different than any other podcast studio? I mean, a lot of choices, like I said. What is it about you that's unique?
Mm-hmm. Our uniqueness comes from our backgrounds. We are former news professionals, and we have backgrounds in broadcasting, and we take a real journalistic approach to helping you create your story and produce it. So that's the advantage that we provide.
Okay, and so your backgrounds give you, I mean, how many years in the news business do you have combined? Have you ever added it up? Not a math question, sorry.
Combined, it's about 30.
Wow, that's a bunch. And so, I mean, give us a little specifics about what you've done. I mean, that is part of your story.
I've been a digital content producer for various TV stations, ranging from markets 147 to market 17. And
I don't know what those mean.
They're television markets, so the bigger city you live in, the smaller number your market is. So like New York is market 1, Orlando is market.
And you did which ones?
Orlando was market 17.
17.
Market 147 was Sioux City, Iowa.
Sioux City, Iowa.
And
what's Omaha?
In between, Omaha was
75, I believe.
Yeah, 75.
75?
75.
Interesting.
It's a mid-market.
Didn't know we were 75 before, right here in Omaha. Well, that's interesting. And Richard, how about you? What kind of work have you done in the news business yourself?
Oh, goodness. My news experience started off in print media, actually.
Oh, really?
I was a editorial researcher for 2 newspapers. First for the Orlando Sentinel in Orlando, Florida, and then I did a stint at the Omaha World Herald.
Okay.
Working in the editorial library.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
From there, I went to television. I started off as a production assistant, quickly became a technical director. I was the production manager at KPTM here in Omaha.
Okay.
I went on to be a senior director in Tallahassee.
Wow.
Lead director in Orlando. I've made the journey.
Yeah, well, you're both of you together sound like a great background in broadcasting, and like you said, telling people's stories. You know how to get it in, get it out, and get it done fast, and fine tune that message. It sounds like
for multiple platforms, not just
Such
TV,
as?
but for digital. So when you write a TV story, you also have to write it for the web, and then from the web, you have to break it into smaller chunks for social media, and just how to incorporate all those and create a workflow.
It's primarily taking something from its infancy and trying to decide what direction that needs to go in.
Sure.
And that's what we specialize in.
Well, yeah, and you've done it for years and years. I mean, because the news stories you report on, they could go a lot of different ways. And well, I didn't really hear that you were editors necessarily, were you, of TV news or TV? But your story created content, you said.
Yeah. So the TV newsroom is a little bit different. There's not really an editor position.
Okay,
There's like an executive producer who
gotcha.
oversees everything. And then for digital, that's even different. So it varies, but we're always writing and always creating.
Yeah, well, yeah, and getting that word out, right? In a quick hurry, in a soundbite sometimes.
Yes.
I imagine when you, and we'll talk more about this, when you work with your customers, isn't that a big challenge sometimes to help them hone their message?
Yeah, yes, and in that initial planning stage too, you have to think about when you even want to launch your podcast and work back from there even.
Well, there's all the strategy. Well, I have sat through your class before that you do at the DoSpace is that through DoSpace itself?
So I volunteer as an instructor at DoSpace.
Okay, yeah, and that helps people kind of get their fingers and toes wet with the idea of podcasting. Well, I have sat through Marjorie's class before now and loved it and took a million notes and then went on to implement almost nothing of it. We're all busy. Yeah. And at any rate, what I was hoping we could do at this show, and with your permission, of course, and is to kind of extend that class and teach people. I mean, what they need to do to get their message out there, and what you can do to help them. Yeah. You up for that?
Absolutely.
Woohoo! Okay. Yes. Well, that'd be great. Before I do that, I just your backgrounds. I mean, you've been crafting voices and stories together, apart and together, for many years. What was the initial spark? We speak to entrepreneurs, of course, who start their own businesses. What was the initial spark that said, "Oh, we should do this for ourselves"? What was that spark?
It was just time. It was
I know, it was time.
It was time.
I think we both worked in news media for so long, and I think we just needed a different outlet.
Right. And yeah, I mean, those are corporate America situations, often owned by conglomerates, right?
Absolutely.
And so decision making is fragmented, perhaps is a word to call it.
That's a good one.
And
Well, it's nice to be able to call your own shots.
yeah, exactly. You don't really have much control sometimes, do you? Yeah. Well, that's the story of all employees, and I think that's the story of most entrepreneurs, your customers and my customers as well. Is I think, but in my case, you know, I can't work for anybody else. I was just thinking about that today. The Steve Jobs movie, where he's just one of the many, where he's portrayed, and they said something like, you know, he says to his friend, "I just can't work for somebody." And I mean, it wasn't quite that radical with you, perhaps, but it was time. Any more reflection on what it was time means?
Yeah, it was time, and the opportunity was there, you know, and it's scary to take that leap, and you know, but
very scary.
It's worth it.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, what's it like to drive to your office versus the old days of going to work? What's that feel like?
It's very liberating. Number one, you know, I can get there as early as I want to, or whenever I feel like it.
Well, I heard a quote, my wife just reminded me about this one the other day. She said, "I'm an entrepreneur. I can choose whatever 18 hours a day I want to work."
Yes. That's right.
That's pretty much what it comes down to. We spend a lot of our time.
You can sleep at 2 in the afternoon or 2 at night to 6 in the morning, whatever 4 hours you want to sleep.
Right.
Well, that kind of sums up, I think, a lot of our viewers as well as how they look at things too. So, before we jump into class, any crazy speed bumps you've hit along the way that you weren't planning for? I mean, you've had this company for how long? A couple years now, almost.
It'll be 2 years in May.
2 years in May. Okay.
Well, part of it, the digital media aspect of it has been in existence for almost 2 years.
Okay. Cool.
We just started the podcasting arm.
Oh, okay.
Just recently, maybe what was it? Last July.
Yeah.
Okay.
Last July is when
So
we
that's
recorded
a
our
new
first
outgrowth.
podcast.
So you started as something else?
Just digital marketing.
Okay.
So social media management.
And why did you add the podcast services into that?
We saw an opportunity. Again, we saw a way to help other people tell stories, and that's primarily what we're really all about. That's what we've always been about.
The digital media without podcasting or without the certain parts of telling the audio or the video or both stories is not a full strategy, wouldn't you say, Marjorie?
Yeah, and you want to be able to use whatever you're creating and multi-purpose it.
Good,
so that's always my philosophy.
I'm learning that from you. That's great. You know, I mean, this show itself could be chopped up into various segments, and I'm sure you and I will be doing that. And that's it, because you know, social media is consumed differently than a television show, and consumed differently reading versus listening versus watching. I heard an interesting one. You know who Gary Vaynerchuk is? He's a big social media speaker and kind of crass, but he's got a huge following. And he was saying how you may have a YouTube video, he says, but maybe a lot of people are listening to that, only listening. They're not watching it, they're listening while they're doing something else. And so you talk about cross-purposing.
Yep.
Is that a good example of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And so the same effect happens with podcasting. People are multitasking while they're listening, they're commuting.
That's why it's so popular.
Yeah.
I think John Lee Dumas, who started the Entrepreneur on Fire, and they have millions of followers. Are you familiar with that one?
No, but I'll look it up.
Yeah, you look it up. It's a good one. It's kind of one of the leaders. He was discovering back in, I think, 2013 or so, he discovered podcasts, and he listened to one and he liked it on his commute to work, and was very disappointed that he had to wait 1 week for another one of the same topic of the same show. And therefore, he eventually decided to make his own, guess what, 7 days a week. Now, he tapes them all on one day, so it's not like he's taping 7 days, but that was what differentiated him in the whole podcasting world, is that he had one every day. Yeah. And they were, 20, 30-minute long things until he's got over 2,000 of them now. So numbers add up.
I think the idea of appointment, whether it's appointment television or appointment broadcasting is slowly declining because people want to be able to listen, want to be able to consume their media when they want to.
I know what you mean by appointment. To define that a little bit. So viewers,
Appointment television?
Yeah.
Say, for instance, like any network TV show that you may watch that comes out at 7 every Thursday night. You have to be there at 7.
Right.
And every Thursday night if you want to watch it.
Right.
But that's a dying breed right now because you have streaming television, you have podcasts,
Right.
which you can decide when you want to watch
Right.
it.
And I mean, DVR extends that somewhat too,
Sure.
so it's not totally dead and it won't die, I don't think. But I understand what you mean. I never heard it referred to as appointment media before. That's kind of interesting to think about, and that's a very key thought, I think, for what we should talk about more when we talk about podcast strategies. So, well, let's jump in with the few minutes we have left into class. I'm Joe Bob, and I want to form I don't know, what kind of company should we form that is going to need a podcast? What kind of company should we make believe create here? Almost everybody does, right?
Oh, well, a very popular format is...
I mean, what kind of business? What kind of business am I in? We're going to create XYZ Acme company.
Maybe making mugs.
Making mugs. Okay, perfect. I love it. Thank you for just saving idea. We are XYZ mug manufacturer, and I own XYZ mug manufacturing, and I hope there's not an XYZ manufacturing out there. There probably is. Sorry, it's an example only. And I said, my kids are talking to me about podcasts, and they listen to their media people on podcasts, and I think maybe my mug company should have a podcast. And what do I do first?
Oh, well, I think there are a lot of things you need to consider when you start a podcast. Number one, do you have the equipment? Number two, do you have the technical background? I mean, because there's a lot of things.
I make mugs. I don't really have it. I don't know anything about tech. I mean, our company has a web page that we looked at 3-4 months ago, and we have someone who's supposed to keep it current, but I don't think she does because she's too busy doing payroll. And but I don't really know much about the technical. What should I do, Richard? What should I do for what's my first step as a techie to set up the technical part of a podcast?
Well, do you have the means to record it? Number one.
Record it. Good idea. Okay, just talk.
Well, I guess before you record, you have to come up with an idea. You have to come up with a format. You have to know exactly what you want to talk about. You have to know exactly what you want to get out there to the people who want to listen to you. Is it an interesting story? Do you know how to tell an interesting story?
There are a lot of questions you're going to ask yourself, is what Richard is saying.
I'm sure. I think what we're going to have to do is hold this over to a second segment and add some of those, address some of those. But for the first one, you've got me thinking, Richard. I think my show is going to be called The Mug Lifestyle, and it's for people. My customers, they can drink out of anything, anywhere, anytime. But when they use my mugs, they feel they do this. They feel part of a life. They like to hold on to them. Mostly females who use my mugs because my mugs are really cool and make them feel whatever together. I'm making this up. But okay, so that's kind of my theme, the mug lifestyle, and my market, I think, is women over age 30 who are concerned about helping to furnish their homes and have coffee with their friends. So what do I do next from a tech standpoint? I've got a theme. Might not be very good, but I took 12 seconds to plan it. Come on. So what do I do next to record that information? You say I got to record it. What do I record it on?
Well, there's a lot of different options you can use. I mean, one of the things that Margie likes to talk about during her class is equipment, and you use what you have.
I like that. I like that. You mean I don't have to spend $2,000 to get started?
Right.
Right. So our whole philosophy too is about removing barriers. And so if the number one barrier is you don't have fancy equipment like we've got on the coffee table here, use your smart device. Just get started by using your smart device. Use what you have available to you.
Awesome. And so I think my first The Mug Life episode is going to be just me talking about the mugs and the care and the design, the love that we put into designing our mugs, and the feeling that I want you as a customer to have when you buy and enjoy our mugs. So I think I'm just going to, as a founder of, what were we, mugs.com? XYZ Mugs.
Yeah. Oh.
Better remember the company name. As the founder of it, I want to convey my why. I want to convey why I'm in the mug business. And so I think it's just going to be me talking about mugs at first. So if I hear you right, I take my smartphone and I record my 20-minute tirade about my passion for mugs.
Yes.
And what do I record on? What tool, what app, whatever?
Voice memos is fine.
Voice memo.
There are other apps out there. Do a little research, whether or not you want to pay for them. But make sure you're in a quiet room. Number 2, another trick is, you know, those canvas totes that are used a lot of storage. Get a canvas tote and put your recording smartphone in there and speak into the canvas tote. That will help capture the sound.
Interesting.
Yeah.
The canvas bag.
Yeah.
Well, you're high budget here. This is great.
and this, I mean, that tip comes from, I saw some NPR reporters doing that. They tweeted like a behind the scenes photo, and that's what I love about your podcast concept that you've just made up here on the spot, is you're opening up the behind the scenes to your business and why you started it and what you're passionate about. And there's all that potential for it. So that's my other word of advice is start kind of seeing what other people are doing and pull the ideas that work for you.
I mean, where do I listen? Where do I find podcasts? I mean, in my emails I get some spam stuff that has listen to my podcast here, but where else? How do I find a podcast?
Well, there are several what they're called
platforms.
Yep, a lot of platforms out there called podcatchers.
Okay.
And it's a matter of signing up.
I meant like the iTunes and the Stitcher.
Right, exactly.
Is that where you're going?
Those are actually called podcatchers. Whether it's iTunes, whether it's Stitcher, whether it's...
Is it called what?
Podcatchers.
Podcatchers.
Okay.
Yes.
That's a term I have not heard.
Yeah, it's an industry jargon.
Okay, yeah, well, we're all about jargon here, so that's cool.
But yeah, it's the...
list some podcatchers where I can listen to other mug podcasts out there.
Spotify is a major one, and then the Apple Podcasts app is also major. Stitcher, and then there's the iHeartRadio. There's podcasts. Then there's the Google Play Store. Just Google Play.
Google Podcasts.
Yeah.
Google Play.
Google
Podcasts. Okay.
So and the list is growing all the time.
Yeah.
So.
Well, there's plenty of places, and I recognize all of those, and there are plenty of places. I had you do that just in case someone doesn't know where to listen to podcasts. We're starting at zero here today, and now they'll know where to go. And then can you sort by category or by subject, or how do you find what you want?
Yeah. So when you first go to one of those podcatchers, especially like Spotify, you just click the little podcast button, and then they've got like genres, and there's crime, and then there's pop culture, and there's all. I mean, think about it. Like for any topic, there's a podcast.
Well, and that's true.
And those, we have found that the most popular podcasts are the really niche podcasts,
right?
The ones that are so narrowed and focused.
Well, I'm glad you said that because, well, first of all, because XYZ Mud Company is pretty narrow.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I want to sell a lot of mugs, and so I'm going to really appeal to my tight niche.
They all have an audience.
And they do, yeah. And I've heard, and maybe you know this, the right answer, I've heard there are 700,000 podcasts out there.
That is correct.
Yeah, that's a good
starting
number.
So you do have to stand out, don't you? And during our next segment, we're going to talk more about social media and differentiating and marketing and more of that nichemanship. Right now, I'm going to back into the text. So I record my tirade. I don't know why I call it a tirade. my sermon, whatever, about mugs onto maybe voice
memo.
Voice memo, yeah.
Voice memo or an app that I can find online. And now what do I do, Richard?
Well, you'll take that audio file, and you could just pretty much take that audio file and load it up to a hosting service.
How do I do that?
Well, there is a step in between there too. You may want to edit some of your tirade.
Well, I think
Well, I think, you know, we're talking about the bare bones.
Okay.
A lot of people don't know how to edit.
Yeah, well, and editing is another complex, time-consuming
It's very
wrinkle.
time-consuming.
I know that. You know that. We all know that. So, I mean, be sure to plan for time-consuming editing if you want that. Some people don't do that. Some people have the raw approach.
Yeah.
I'm me. Take me as you want me. You know,
Right.
here I am, and whatever.
There are different philosophies on how people want to, you know,
Sure.
put their message out there. Whether it's just raw, a lot of people, you know, and then you have those editors who like to take out all the ums and ahs.
Yeah.
They find those distracting.
Yeah.
But then a lot of people think that, you know, just the raw is the best way to communicate.
Sure.
That's the way that people.
Well, for me as an entry-level Joe Bob of XYZ Coffee Mug Company, I think I'm bare bones right now. I'm going to be raw and, you know, coughs, whatever, and I'm just gonna put it out there. And so, how do I put it out there?
So that's when you need to determine your hosting service.
Okay.
And there's always more and more out there. There are some free options, but when you're getting something for free, you're also giving up something. So you have to determine if that's part of your end goals.
Okay.
You know, and then there's the paid services. So then you have to determine if you have the budget for that.
Okay.
So the more questions you have to ask yourself.
Right. You know what? We're going to hold some of those questions over to our next segment. We're going to do a second segment because as you can tell, we're just scratching the surface here, aren't we?
Yeah.
and I have more questions because I want to launch my XYZ mug podcast pretty soon. Now I'm going to have to do it. Problem is I don't have a mug company. But let's see. Tell us briefly about your services as a company, and then we'll wrap up for today.
Sure. Like I kind of said earlier, we're the one-stop shop where it comes to recording, editing, and then distributing your podcast and helping guide you along the way.
So if I don't want to do all this stuff, who do I go to?
Us.
Okay. The right answer. Thanks for joining us on this week's episode of the Grow Your Biz Show. I do hope you watch next week because it's going to be even more detail with Richard and Marjorie about how to get your podcast started and launched. And we will see you next week. In the meantime, visit growmedia.com and learn about how you can tell your company's unique story with video. Talk to you soon. Thanks for coming, and go out there and grow something.